All right, so welcome to Matter and Tales from the Trenches. My name is Josh Chapman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Matter. And thank you for joining us tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with Matter, we are where innovation happens in healthcare. We do that by being a startup incubator. We have over 200 startups that belong here to Matter. We're a corporate innovation accelerator. We have over 70 corporate partners that work on innovation with us. And we're a community nexus where we host events like this and bring the community together to talk about healthcare. And we do that, put on Tales from the Trenches with the help of our partners, Paragon Biosciences and Jumpstart Ventures, which you'll see on the slides, their logos there. So we thank them for their support, and we thank you all for being here. Very quick housekeeping items. So if you'd like to ask a question, we have social QA, and there's an address up there where you can submit your questions during tonight's event. Lisa, who's our speaker, has to leave right at 7, so we're probably going to try and wrap up around 6:50. She has a flight to catch. So for those of you who've been here before, sometimes we're able to network afterwards. Tonight's not going to be able to do that, but if you submit your questions through social QA, we'll be able to get to them, most of them here during the event. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce Lisa Earnhardt, who's the CEO of Intersect ENT. And there's really two reasons why I'm excited to have her here tonight. One, Intersect has an amazing story with tremendous growth since she took the helm in 2008, and she'll talk about that right up through their IPO and to where they are today. But the second reason, frankly, is Lisa is a woman, and we need to have more women CEOs in healthcare specifically. So it's a great opportunity to have her here, and in addition to her role as CEO, Intersect is a leader from a board perspective, where they have over 40% of their board seats are held by women, which is something, those of you who are familiar with Matter, you know we care very much about that. So it's a real honor to have her here on the stage, and please join me in welcoming her and Rishi Shah, who's going to be our moderator this evening.
So welcome everybody, and I really want to welcome and thank Lisa for being here with us tonight. She's actually got a board meeting tomorrow morning and is gonna get out of here as soon as we wrap up. So this might be the most dedicated visitor we've had. Thank you.
I'm always happy to come back to Chicago.
Thank you for joining us here from the Bay Area. You know, so Chicago is hometown for you.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be clear, it's DeKalb, Illinois, which is 60 miles west of Chicago. So, that would be the land of cornfields for those of you who haven't made it out.
And you know, you run a public company. It's done really well. You've joined it for 12 people, taken it to many, many hundreds. But tell us a little bit about your first job in the Midwest here.
Yeah, so as I said, grew up in DeKalb, Illinois. So for those of you who are from that neck of the woods, one of the most common jobs for kids, which I did, was detasseling corn. So literally working in the cornfields, which definitely showed me the value of hard work as well as education. Because I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
So I can only imagine, right? And,
yeah.
You know, I'm sure when you're out in the Bay Area telling people you're detasseling,
they don't even know what I'm
like. What is that, right?
No idea. So.
Unlike half of us who have all detasseled.
But you probably have detasseled corn before, right? Or at least know someone who has. So.
But you know, we were talking a little bit about what it was like when you were growing up, and I know at one point you wanted to be a math teacher, and then of course you ended up going into engineering in college at Stanford. And tell us a little bit about that. You know, tell us what you were like early in life. Those of you that come to Tales frequently know I love studying entrepreneurs early in their life and understanding what kind of sparks them. And then, you know, you had something, I guess you'd say maybe serendipitous, right after college that exposed you to healthcare, which is maybe where that came from. So take us through that early part of your life.
Yeah, so I did grow up loving math, amongst other things. I just love school, love learning, which I think of myself as a lifelong learner. So that's still very much part of who I am, and I think most entrepreneurs are, right? Because you learn a lot of things that, oftentimes things that don't work, which is important learning and important to apply. So as you mentioned, I was an engineer, and part of that was being good at math. Part of it was liking problem solving, which is what I really think engineering is really all about. So coming out of Stanford, I was looking at mostly a lot of different tech companies because I was right there in the Bay Area, right there at Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. But one of the opportunities I was exposed to was management consulting, and specifically in the field of healthcare. And so I was sort of like, hey, I'll be able to problem solve as well as do it in an area where I could really sort of make a difference in the world. And I think that's like kind of where I've focused a lot of my energy in the past. I have a lot of energy, and so I might as well focus on areas where I feel like I'm really making a difference, and that's really where healthcare came into play. So yeah, I worked at a management consulting firm that was focused squarely on the provider side of healthcare. I think some of you work for hospitals or healthcare systems, so I was all about how do you improve overall hospital operations.
And then, you found yourself back in business school, back here in Chicago.
Right up the road at Kellogg at Northwestern in Evanston.
And tell us a little bit what that was like. How did you decide you wanted to go do that? And tell us about, how that maybe prepared you ultimately for what you did at Guidant and then running your own company. I know you worked at Dell at a really exciting time and yet found, hey, I want to do healthcare. So tell us about that next chapter.
Yeah, I loved my time at business school. I mean, it's rare that you get a chance to take 2 years and I did the full-time program. So I was 2 years, and it was just really all about me, all about learning, all about like figuring out what I want to do with my life when I grow up, which I haven't quite figured out yet, but I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. And at Kellogg, one of the things that I realized, I'm like, I really love innovation. Like that, it's super broad and just sounds a little vague, but at the same time, I really love a lot about that in terms of like new ideas and new thinking, and I love the pace because I like to make things happen really quickly. And having spent time on the provider side of healthcare, I realized that wasn't always in sync with what I love. And so that's when I went to Dell, because Dell was at the time, now I'm dating myself, so this is about 23 years ago, Dell was the hot technology company down in Austin, Texas. And it was just like, it's invigorating when you're really working at a company that's doing things really differently and really sort of making a mark. But after spending the summer there, I honestly was like, what did we do? Like, we sold more computers, which was like, and it was huge. There was so much more that Dell was doing. But at the time, I sort of came back to like the things I love about healthcare, which is really working in a field. And I applaud all of you because it's such a great opportunity to work in a field where you're making a difference some way, somehow, regardless of the role that you play. And that's really where MedTech came into play, because I was able to combine healthcare and technology together. It's like peanut butter and jelly for me, or peanut butter and chocolate more likely. So it is such a great, it's like so fun to be doing something where it is still really fast paced. It's all about innovation. It's all about driving solutions for patients and for physicians, and to improve health and wellness. So it's a great field to be in. So I was really fortunate to join a leader at the time in cardiovascular medicine, Guidant, up in the Twin Cities, which is even colder than here, if you can imagine. And it's hard to imagine. I thought today was cold. I forget, I've gotten super soft living out in the Bay Area.
It happens. So you come out of business school, you join Guidant, and you're probably not thinking, boy, one day I'm going to go work at a company of 12 people. But there are things that happen over your time at Guidant, and then as Boston Scientific buys Guidant, that prepare you for the entrepreneurial journey. And so, talk to us a little bit about that. Some of the people watching here might not yet, be CEO or part of an early team at a startup, but no, maybe one day they want to do that. And what are things that, folks can do that you did that you think prepared you for that journey? And how did you approach that? Because you had many different roles at Guidant, I know.
Yeah, and I think just talking about sort of making that switch, a big piece of it is so much of innovation in healthcare comes from the startup arena. Sometimes big companies have a hard time getting on their own way to drive innovation. Guidant, I think, was unique in that way that we didn't, but I think in general it's just harder to drive innovation. And so that was something I realized over time that I really wanted to make the move. But as I was going along, I would say there's a couple of roles as I look back. I mean, first and foremost, it was being in a sales role, which you think, why in the heck would that have to do with entrepreneurship? And I think it's really two things, and it's fun because I have a couple of my sales team members here tonight, so it's great to have you. Appreciate your support. But what a unique opportunity to like literally walk in the shoes of your customer. So in medical technology, that is, you know, really trying to understand what the physician needs, what the patient needs, what the clinician needs. Like, what are they doing? What could be better? Really sort of, you know, living in their world. And that really, I think, as an entrepreneur, like so much of it is, it's not what physicians tell you or what you hear from healthcare administrators. Sometimes it's what they don't say that's actually important, right? Or it's what you see. And so I think that was probably by far one of the most important roles for me, and one of the reasons I still, you know, spend time with customers, right? Because I think it is different to really understand, and it gets harder and harder, especially now that we're public, but it is something I really value. Other roles, in particular, at one point I was a product manager, so managed a defibrillator business, so it was implantable defibrillators, and what was really neat about that role is you're really the sort of champion for the product within the company. So you're the sort of the face of the product with the sales organization, but you are also sort of that the point person internally, whether it be for forecasting, whether it be for future products, whether it be working with customer service, whatever it ends up being. So you really get a sense of all the different things that have to come together to bring innovation to market. And you all know, as wherever you are in the stage of your career and your experience, like there's so much that has to go right to bring medical technology to market. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Absolutely. So, you know, we can come back in the Q&A portion, and I really do encourage you guys to think of questions that you log into social Q&A, especially because we won't have too much time at all after the session ends. So we can come back to maybe the guidance portion, but you know, let's move forward now. So now it's, I think maybe 2007 or so.
You don't have to give dates. You can just leave dates out of the whole discussion.
And it's, you know, it's 2017 or so. No.
Whatever, yeah.
So you know, it's whatever year, and you're now thinking, okay, I'm living on Sand Hill Road. You mentioned, I'm surrounded by startups and VCs. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to go do this, and you were pretty thoughtful about, okay, I want to pick this type of space, more white space, not, you know. Maybe share with us what got you to that point, what led you to think, I want to go try doing early stage, and then what your process was to then find this is the company and this is the opportunity I want to jump into.
Yeah, so you are right. It was 2007. I was running a division of Boston Scientific, so running the cardiac surgery business. We were all about less invasive approaches to cardiac bypass. As you know, there are a number of leading medical technologies focused in cardiovascular. So it was really an interesting field to be in for most of my time at Guyton and then Boston. But as I thought about sort of my career and what I wanted to do in my life, as I realized so much of innovation happens at startups, and I think I mentioned that previously, but that's the chance to actually get to go run one and be early stage, roll up my sleeves. You know, part of it was like, can I actually do that? Like, would I be good at that? Because not everyone is, right? And you see a number of people move from, you know, more corporate jobs to the startup world, and they fail miserably, right? And so part of it was like, especially living there, and as you said, I live on Sand Hill Road, so like I'm literally a mile away from like the hotbed of all the venture capitalists. So I'm exposed to it literally every day at like Pete's Coffee, at the grocery store, at my gym. I mean, I can't help but like catch the fever. And once again, this is 2007. This is before the market crash, so the going was good, right? And so I was thinking, and I started thinking, just started meeting with a couple of VCs, and I was fortunate in my network to have some. As I said, they were, you know, the two major VCs literally have offices on the Sand Hill Road, U.S. Venture Partners and Kleiner Perkins, that were the initial investors in our company. So just started networking and just getting a sense for what was out there, what stage of company would I want to go do, what would they hire me for, you know, all those types of things. And so one of the big considerations was just the opportunity. And since I had spent so much time in cardiovascular, which is a much more established market with some amazing innovative companies focused on that, you know, one of the things I thought about was I want to go to more white space. Like, I want to create that market. I want to create the next kind of big medical device market. And as I started thinking about the different opportunities, ENT, or ear, nose, and throat, became an interesting market because really there hadn't been historically a lot of innovation, bringing to bear either on the pharma side or the device side. So, most of the procedures are, were done with, scalpers and readers and endoscopes, right? So it was like stainless steel. And so it was just very different than the cardiovascular world I had grown up in. And so when I thought about opportunities, I'm like, a white space, and then having like a strong group of initial investors, which you obviously don't always get to choose, and a strong group of initial team members. And once again, you don't always get to choose those. And I'm fortunate to have joined arms with some just exceptionally talented folks who really were open to doing whatever it would take to make things a reality. And that's really where I was brought in by the venture capitalists to take this initial idea and make it a reality, right? And we all have different skills, and I realized that's what I really love to do.
That was so thoughtful, and even when you shared it with me, I thought, okay, there's a certain wisdom in approaching the white space and not maybe where everyone's focused and all of that. But despite the thoughtfulness, there were still some tales from the trenches in that first
oh
year.
boy,
right?
yeah.
You go in and there's 3 months of runway left, and you're like,
better lucky than good, right?
Yeah, what did I just sign up for? So tell us what that was like. You jump in, and you mentioned you don't know all the venture terms.
I didn't know anything. Like when someone asks, well, what's your drywall date? And I'm like, I don't know what like, can you explain to me? And they're like, when do you run out of money? I'm like, oh, you've made that very clear. And I actually didn't even know when I took the job, right? And I started in March of 2008, and we ran out of money in June. Like, hello. I mean, I just did everything. I mean, they said, like, oh, one of the first things you need to do is raise money, yada, yada, yada. And I didn't fully appreciate, like, 3 months to raise a round of venture is not kind of typical, right? And what I also didn't realize, and get this, and this is where, like, I didn't know what I didn't know. And sometimes that naivete plays well for you, and it did for me. But get this, the company had done a seed round of investing, right? So we had a bunch of seeds. We had Series A investors. So phenomenal Series A investors, right? So Kleiner Perkins and U.S. Venture Partners, both great firms and great partners. They had done a Series A extension, right? So they needed to go back to the well to raise some additional capital to deliver on their next value-driving milestones. Oh, and then by the way, they took venture debt. And so I started in, and I had like a $3.5 million debt, plus they had already raised $10 million, and we were running out of money in 3 months. And so, yeah, I'm not so sure I would do that again. So at least I'd ask the question, like the hard questions. And I said, like, had I started even like 3 months later, the company would be dead. It would literally have done. And it was interesting because I remember at the time I was running a division in Boston. We were selling it off to another company. And it closed in January. And I, of course, I'm like, I just want to take some time off, right? Like, this has been a ride. Yeah. My son was less than a year old, right? So through this whole selling of the business and the integration with Boston and then spinning out my company, and that closed in January. And I'm like, I just want to take some time. And then I kind of started digging in. I'm like, I actually don't have time. Yeah. And so there was a lot of learning. Like, the best way to learn about a business is when, like, there's a gun to your head. Right, because I had to learn about the business and how am I going to sell it, right? Like, how am I going to, convince investors to come on board? Unfortunately, with great VCs, they had a lot of relationships, but once again, they had already gone back to the well once with their partners. They needed an outside firm to come in and lead the round.
Absolutely. So, you've got that going on. You've got to raise money, and you're very successful raising a B round. But tell us more generally what it was like coming from running a division to now an office with 12 people, and what it was like managing the company at that stage, and how you adapted yourself to that environment, and then what it was like over the course of time. I think there's over 400 or so people, but it's been through stages, right? So what was it like at 50 and 100 and 200 and so on and so forth, and how did the way you practice leadership as a CEO change?
Yeah, and I think to begin with, we did have just 12 people, and so if you wanted a team meeting, you just said like, hey guys, like let's all huddle up in the conference room, right? Like that was it. Like, and so everyone knew everything. we were all on the team. There wasn't like my senior team and the team. It was like, this is
Everyone's
the
on the
team.
management team,
Like when
yeah.
you have like the Monday meeting, everyone's there, right? The entire company. In fact, we just kind of disbanded from that idea about 3 or 4 years ago, because obviously we just had too many people, right? And at the end of the day, not everyone needs to sort of know everything about the business. In fact, that's one of the changes of going public.
Right.
Everyone can't know everything about the business, right? At least at certain times of the year. And so, yeah, so we spent quite a bit of time sort of early on. I mean, it's interesting because I think so much of what I did to begin with was not just raise money, but then recruit great talent, right? So that was a lot of it, which was for the first 100 or so people, I interviewed everyone. And it's not because I felt like I was going to be such a great job at a great judge of talent, or that they needed my stamp of approval. But what I did want to understand is, in those early stages, each single individual contributes in a meaningful fashion to your culture, for better or for worse, right? So you got to know what you're getting. And being really deliberate about what an individual is going to sort of bring to the table, not just in terms of core capabilities and competencies, but also kind of style and all that soft stuff that, as an engineer, it doesn't always come as naturally. But I think really important part of sort of building the culture. And it's interesting because now that we've scaled, we actually had to revisit sort of our culture, probably a couple of years ago. As we were talking a little bit earlier, and I think it was maybe around 300 or so people. All of a sudden, things were like, it's not quite clicking, right? And what is that? So we actually did a full employee survey, really trying to understand sort of what do people really love about Intersect? What do we really want to aspire to be as an organization? And really try to codify our culture and really focusing on our values, right? And so what's really important to us? What are sort of the non-negotiables? So we spent time doing that really deliberately because we realized if you don't, it's amazing. It just, things could start to spin, good or bad. It just may not be as deliberate as you want it to be.
Absolutely. Now, when it was less structured perhaps, and you were just interviewing for those intangibles, what were you looking for? Do you have interview questions that you still remember that you would ask for all of those roles? And what were those intangibles that you would look for? And then as you were more structured and intentional about this is the culture we want as we become more institutional or whatever you call it, did it change? Or were you really just codifying the same thing but finding maybe new formats to describe it and assess it?
Yeah, I think to begin with, one of the things that I always looked for, it's sort of that fire in the belly, which, you're hiring for sort of, specific skills and competencies, but there's also that kind of will to win and that internal drive, just not everyone has it. They may be really smart and really capable, but at the end of the day, it's going to be tough. And we had some, I think about the 3-month dry well, that's nothing compared to the stuff we had in the future, right? It was not, it looks like such a pretty picture 10 and a half years later, but it was not pretty every step of the way. And you realize if people don't really have that fire in the belly, and they really don't just really care, really believe in what you're doing, there's people who will come to work and they really like their work, but do they really care? And do they sort of operate with the utmost in integrity? So it's those types of things that I'd really focus on, which aren't typical, and you kind of, it's not what you see on the resume, right?
Especially, I think, in the device and life sciences world, it's not that there's any lower bar, but it's more rare for CEOs to really look for that as a headline. Which is interesting.
Yeah, because oftentimes they're saying oh, but Lisa, they could do the job, they could step in tomorrow, and I'm yeah, but what happens 6 months from now? Do we there's sort of the urgent versus the important, and sometimes in a startup you can focus way too much time on the urgent.
Yeah. And
fill the need, plug the hole, live another day. I literally have probably said all those things.
Absolutely.
In a meeting, but at the end of the day, it's and I think as a CEO, your job is to really focus on the important, right?
Yes, absolutely. Now maybe, zoom us into now. So, how has your job changed? How has your role changed? How do you spend time now as you look into the future? What are you enthusiastic about? What are you excited about? Not just, for Intersect, but the industry at large. We talked a little bit about innovation and
Yeah.
how, there's some challenges out there as well. And, maybe you can give us a vantage point of what you see on the horizon.
All right, so I think Rishi just asked like a dozen questions.
I
or
did.
something. That's very good. So let me just take the first one. All right, so we did go public. So we went public just over 4 years ago. And as I think about sort of the decision to do that, we had been, our first venture round came in 2006, right? And so this is in 2014, or we actually started thinking about it as 2013. So you guys can do the math, like, we're getting a little old in the venture funds sort of portfolio, and so it was we considered it because we were thinking about like, well, what do? We can stay private and sort of get to profitability, and then invest more in the future. We could sell the company, and that's always an option. And we were fortunate because we had interest along the way, but we also had incredibly strong conviction around the potential for the company. Or we could take the company public, right, which gives the opportunity for our venture investors to exit if they deemed appropriate. It allowed my employees as well, because you realize like 10 years, like there's a few life-changing. I have employees who are like, Lisa, I'm sending my kids to college. Like, this isn't working for me. The math doesn't quite work in the startup world. I'm like, no, I get it. Like, equity is a big part of the compensation. And then it also, like, most importantly, it's given us access to capital. And so we were in a fortunate position because we were starting to look at it really seriously in the second half of 2013. I remember that board meeting, December of 2013, distinctly, because at the time there had been 2 medical device companies that had gone public that year, LDR and Tandem. And I'm like, 2 points make a line. Like, I think their window's open, And so we started working on it in earnest in the first half of 2014 and went public in July. But it really has allowed us to not just expand our sales force and drive commercialization of our surgical product, but it's also let us advance our pipeline, which we would not have been able to do with the same velocity as a private company, right? We would have had to drive to profitability and then have those funds, because it's hard to get, as you know, when you start, we raised, just to put it in perspective, we raised $90 million in venture funding, and we raised $150 million in institutional money as a public company. And so we have combination products, so it's both a drug and device. So the investment required from a research and development, clinical, regulatory, commercialization, it's pretty significant. So it's hard to do that as a private company long term.
Absolutely. Now, do you like this stage? You've stayed in place through all of those different phases.
You'd ask me, like, what's it like to be a public company CEO, right? Yeah, I forgot about that question. All right, yeah, so.
I will give you another compliment, too, about that, which is rare. You mentioned over half your management team has stayed in place from the beginning, which when we talk to public company CEOs, I mean, that's a rare, after 10 years or 11 years, that being the case. So that's interesting, too. So I'll give you those 2-in-1 questions.
Yeah, and I'll try to get the other 10 as well. And so, it's a very different company today. I mean, I started with 12 people. When I started, it was like, does the product work? Can we prove it? Can we make it? Will anyone buy it? Like, we had all those questions ahead. And now it's like the quarterly earnings. And I don't know if anyone loves that, right? Like, I love the fact that we have money to invest in our future. I love the fact that our employees have liquidity, and so if they have life needs, they can access the funds as needed. And it's given us a great platform as well. I think there's some sort of softer benefits of just being public. That gives you a little bit more legitimacy. Like, you're the real deal. Like, as you're dealing with healthcare systems or payers or physicians, it's somewhat like there's some stamp of approval somehow, some way. But there's a lot about, like, my job is different now. It is very different. Like, 12 people, like, I'm answering the door. I would support initial clinical cases. I used to be the QC on all of our clinical reports. I mean, I would do whatever, whatever, right? I would be in the cadaver labs or the animal work, all those types of things, right? Like, that's just part of it. Now I have a team of folks who obviously are doing all of that. So it's changed my job now. I spend quite an amount of time on external relations. So that's meeting with, Wall Street analysts. It's meeting with investors. So I do spend, probably more than my fair share of time in New York, as you might imagine, because a lot of the financial world centers around there. So it's just different.
Yeah.
I like it. Like, it's fun getting questions about my business because I get like questions. It's not just about the product and the clinical data. It could be around intellectual property. It could be around our balance sheet. It could be around gross margins or our future products. I mean, it's such a range, and that's a fun thing to do because you have smart people peppering you with questions. But sometimes when you're in a hotel room for 8 hours and you're literally like speed dating, every half hour you have another group of investors come in and they, like ask the exact same question. You're like, that's a really interesting question, Rishi. Let me just press the tape recorder. No, it's, wait, this is actually being like audio taped, right? Uh-oh. I'm in trouble now. I'm sure they know. They're like, you probably have never heard this question before. However, but it's good. It's good. As I said, it's just different. I had actually, that was sort of, for me, long term, I had thought, and earlier on in my career, when I was running a division of Boston Scientific, those are kinds of calls I would get, like, do you want to go run a public company,
Yeah,
And I was like, gosh, if I do that, I'll never get a chance to do the startup thing, right? Because you sort of get to the point where it's like, we don't think you can roll up your sleeves,
yes.
right? And now that I can show I do it, in fact, I actually love it. Like, it's really fun to be so engaged with the physician, to be there from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I am fortunate because I have a lot of team members who've sort of stuck through it. Our jobs are all totally different than when we started.
Yeah,
even the fact that it's the same country, same company, even though they've either moved functional areas or in a lot of cases, like, jobs get narrower,
Yeah.
At first, like, everyone does everything, right? And then over time, as you scale, like, you run a department, or which I hate words like department and corporations and that kind of stuff, but that's just kind of the world we live in, right?
Absolutely. What's been the biggest leap for somebody on your team? Somebody that started doing this, and then 10 years later they were doing something you wouldn't have imagined. Has there been anything like that?
Yeah, I think all along, like, part is just seeing the team develop and grow. It's been really fun to see, because not everyone has made that transition, right? And, and I have still some folks on my team before who were in senior roles, and they're still with us, but in a different role. They may not be on the leadership team, but they're still
big
contributor to the business, and that's fantastic, because, the needs of the business change as we've scaled.
Now, for the entrepreneurs in the room or people who are thinking about starting a company in healthcare, you see a lot, as you mentioned. Whether you're getting coffee or there's startups being born every 2 minutes in the part of the world you're in, and we see it here in Chicago in a way as well. There's a lot going on. What do you think are maybe the 2 or 3 areas that you think merit more investment, more entrepreneurs digging in? That when we look back 5 years from now or 10 years from now, there are spaces that we'll say, wow, that was a great place to start a business. Are there things top of mind for you like that?
Yeah, I think broadly, and you're right, I do get a lot of exposure. Part is being in the Bay Area. I'm super involved with the Stanford Biodesign program, so I'm sure some of you are familiar with that program. And so I get the fun of working with folks who actually, fortunately, some of them have actually spun off their companies since graduating from the program, so that's fun to see. And I think, as I think about things that are really interesting, it's technology that and I'm also, I have a bias, right, because I kind of have grown up in the health tech world. So I know some of you in like biotech or more digital health, and I got a little dabbling in some of those areas, but I always think about things that are improving clinical outcomes while lowering the overall cost of care. Right, and so things have changed so dramatically since I've been in healthcare, where at first it was like, if you build it, they'll buy it. As long as you're improving health, as long as you're improving clinical outcomes,
right.
What's not to like, right? Well, sometimes it's the price tag that's not to like, right? And so really understanding the health economic benefit and the real value you're bringing. So as I think about opportunities that I find most compelling, it's really thinking about, gosh, can you do both of those simultaneously, or where do they fall along that continuum? So I think, and there's just a lot of exciting things, with AI, and it's really it is such a great time to be in healthcare when you think about the amount of disruption that at least should happen, and I believe can happen. Never in my career. I mean, it's such a mess, right? Every aspect. Sorry, I'm sure you all do great work, but broadly, healthcare as an industry in the U.S. at least,
yes.
Let alone the rest of the world, there's so many areas that we could do better and we should do better.
Absolutely. Speaking of that, our most upvoted question right now is in which international markets do you see the most opportunity for high-growth, innovative medtech companies? We talked a little bit about the U.S. and the changes in the regulatory landscape. What's your view on international markets? Do you do much work internationally, and where do you see opportunity?
We've really not done a lot historically international because I was always a big believer in building business close to home. And part of that was, we're serving an elective procedure, and typically those are more widely adopted in the U.S. than other markets. And if we didn't get PMA approval in the U.S., we wouldn't have a business, right? So we've kind of done a little bit backwards of some companies who end up, they start in Europe and then they come over, right? That's pretty common. We're going backwards. So we're just starting to sell in Germany and starting in some other European markets. I think one of the markets that's most attractive broadly is Asia Pacific. I think China, for lots of reasons, is super attractive, and China, for lots of reasons, is really scary.
Yeah.
And I think, from a regulatory perspective, from it's just really challenging. We're not in it. We're not in, we've made that deliberate decision, but it's really hard because it's such a phenomenal opportunity, and I think we could add real value there. It's just that there's enough things that make business make doing business in China not work for us. Which is so unfortunate. I think as a multinational, you can make the investments, right? You put a plant over there. You're hiring Chinese nationals. But there's other areas in Asia Pacific, like for example, we're working through the process in Japan, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it's just the China nut. I don't think it's an industry we've really cracked, and it's something. I sit on the board of AdvaMed, which is the sort of trade association for all the sort of medical technology companies, and needless to say, there's always a lot of chit-chat around China and how do we help influence and make sure that great innovation can make it around the globe.
How do you find the health economics subject being discussed or approached in other countries vis-a-vis the U.S.? Do you see big differences, for example, in the way, say, Germany or countries in Asia Pacific will look at that topic of, does this make sense not only from clinical outcomes, but also from a health economics perspective?
Yeah, and that's the one thing I realized. That's the hardest thing we as an industry have to face, is just really getting our arms around sort of the value of healthcare that we're delivering collectively. And I think what I have found so interesting in my career, I recognize like every single country, and even within countries, sometimes they view it differently, the private sector, the public sector, and it's so complex. And some countries do look at just the cost piece, right?
Yeah.
And it's super frustrating, but yet I understand when you have healthcare as a percent of GDP is what it is. They literally can't afford. As I look at our technology, I'm like, hey, but yet the use of this technology, while it costs more upfront, actually saves money in the long term.
Right.
But some of these governments, they may not exist in the long term if they spend all their money now, right?
Right.
And so it's hard, and everyone is at a different stage in terms of understanding. I mean, we're the same way in the U.S., right? And I think as an industry, we just all need to get better at that. And I was so encouraged to hear that, there are at times folks from Blue Cross Blue Shield here, or Aetna, or Anthem. I think it's just so great to have those minds at the same table as the providers, as the sort of entrepreneurs, because I think together we'll drive some meaningful innovation.
Absolutely. One of our questions is, in today's market, do you see opportunity for SME, med tech companies to grow organically instead of being acquired? So maybe, there's that topic of I think, smaller companies. Is there a path for them to continue to grow organically rather than just be acquired? Clearly, you've gone down.
Yeah, but we are the rare path, right? Like, first and foremost, if no one's told you yet, the majority of startups fail. So there you go. That's the truth, okay? I just want to make sure you knew that, right? Like, there's a pretty good chance if you guys are doing a startup, you will not be successful. Sorry to break the bubble, right? And those that are successful end up getting acquired. Like, that is the normal pathway.
Right.
And that would have been a perfectly fine pathway for us. And as I mentioned, like, we had those options, right? And it's rare to have a board and a team that's saying, no, let's play this thing forward.
Yeah.
Right? We have conviction for the business. I mean, that's a risky proposition, especially given that, it's really hard to take a company, like a med tech company, public. There just aren't that many small cap companies in the medical device arena. So
Are there things that
for good reason, because it's hard. It's hard being a
Yeah.
medical device public company. It's hard being public because you're like every single quarter, well, here's what we did. Here's what we did well. Here's where we sucked wind.
Yeah.
And you say, but we're going to do it again. Not the suck wind part, but like we're going to do the, it's like just constant, right? And not that you obviously are keeping your team and yourself accountable all of the time. It's just that like constant kind of almost like a grind, right?
Yeah. Are there things, looking back, if you're talking to entrepreneurs that, maybe want to pursue that path, knowing that it can be a grind and it can be difficult,
Yeah.
they want to pursue that path. Are there things you felt you did in retrospect to give you that optionality, or was it really just opportunistic? You thought the window was open, the board made the decision, or did you build to it? Were there strategic decisions along the way to say, you know what, let's build the business in this way so that we can go public?
Yeah, so we really tried to create that optionality, and the way that we did it was with our commercialization strategy. So instead of going really wide to begin with, we said, hey, let's go in a targeted fashion, pick markets, go deep, drive traction, and sort of develop that recipe for success, which we were able to sell that recipe then to the public markets. So we said, it's like, hey, we're small today, but if we just add fuel to the fire, this thing will take off, right? And that was exactly sort of in a more deliberate fashion. I mean, that also helped with strategics, right? Because most of the strategics, they have an established sales force. It helped them understand, like, hey, what could we do with this in our bag, right? And so instead of allowing us to sell across the US, we literally just picked certain markets.
Yeah.
And having that discipline is hard, but it really helped us understand what the real potential was for the business.
Absolutely. That reminds me of something I've seen different companies do to try to, with a limited amount of resources, demonstrate how big it could be. And I've never seen that in a device.
Yeah, it's not as typical. I think more companies are doing it now because it's expensive to commercialize new technologies, right? And it's risky. You don't know what you don't know, and sometimes that works for you, like raising our Series B. It was good that I didn't know that we didn't have much runway, or I didn't understand what that meant. But it's really great to sort of be able to have the luxury of sort of going deep and sort of developing that understanding before we went broad.
Absolutely. We spent a little bit of time on hiring tonight, but CEOs will often say it's the most important thing a CEO can do, hire well and build the team. One of our questions tonight is, without naming names, what was the biggest hiring mistake you made?
Yeah, the list, unfortunately, I can think of a couple different examples. And I think I had one where we were, when we were launching, so we're an interesting bird in lots of ways, but one of the ways is that we're a medical device company, but we are launching for the first time a pharmaceutical product. And so what it takes to launch a drug is very different. And part of building the capabilities of the team, we brought in some folks who come from that world, right? Because I grew up, like I'm a med tech junkie. Like that's my world, that's my home. And so I had brought someone on board that was their expertise and had done amazing things in the pharma world, but just was not sort of the right fit for us. But like it was hard to know, right? Because I knew they had a different background, and that's exactly why I was hiring them, right? Because I wanted someone who had lived in that world, had been successful, because once again, I didn't know what you didn't know. And so I there's so many things I don't know about, and that's why I just get people much smarter than me around the table to help us figure things out, right? And that one, it didn't fit. Like it was not a great fit. And fortunately, we recognized that pretty early. The individual transitioned out. We sort of moved on. We've learned from that.
Yeah.
But it's hard because sometimes when things aren't a fit, you're like, well, is it because it was the wrong person, or was it's just like the wrong profile, right? And I think pharma is different than med tech, right? Like the pace in which they do things, how they make the decision, the resources that they have. Oh boy, it's different. So
absolutely. And we can talk more about that too. That sounds like a whole topic. This is an interesting question. Discuss the conflict between milestone priorities for investors versus milestones that are the highest priority for your long-term plan. And you have a vantage point of doing that early and private, and then now public. So how do you maybe balance that?
Yeah, and it's a constant struggle. And that's one thing, as I made the transition from sort of the corporate world to the startup world, I realized how much sort of those value-driving milestones as a private company, how critically important those are. And what I really always try to do is align the milestones for the team with those of the investors. And so I think about the time we were preparing for launch. And so we were literally, we had already filed with the FDA. We felt like, hey, we're going to get approval, of course. But yet we waited until we determined whether or not we'd have to go to panel. And I don't know if you guys know, but FDA sometimes has panels for products where they bring a bunch of experts around the table, and those don't always work out as well for companies, right? And so we literally didn't invest anything in the launch. A lot of mind time, but that's kind of free at this point, right? But we blood, sweat, and tears, but no real money in the launch until we got the hey, you're not going to panel, because we're like, all right, if we're not going to panel, the review must be going well. We're going to get approval. Well, that didn't leave us a heck of a lot of time, right? And so, but that was really the right thing for the company, given that we were venture-backed. Because what if we would have had to go back to the well and I said, well, I just spent, this money on a launch for nothing, right? And so it's hard to do. I mean, I find it hard in the public world too, because there's the quarterly numbers that I talked about, but then there's also we're investing for the long run, and so I have to keep painting that sort of picture to our investor community so they understand why is it so important that we're investing in our pipeline, because you want us to be successful, not just this quarter or next quarter. Some of them do. They actually don't really care long term, but that's a whole nother story, right? It's easier with venture capitalists, quite honestly, because they really are buying into long-term vision. You're married. Yeah. You're dating at best with your institutional investors. With a VC, you don't get a choice. They're venture capitalists. It's very hard for them to get out.
That is very interesting, because the way in which you lead on that topic probably shapes who comes into the company as a public company as well.
Yeah.
The dance of balancing those two, and the way in which you do it might even affect who comes in and who likes it and who doesn't. This is a I'm gonna skip the hard question here.
What?
I'm teasing. We'll come back to it at the end. There's an upvoted question that is really catching steam by 3-1 that we're gonna save for the end. Some of you might know what it is. It's about the corn, how have you crafted your leadership style as a woman? Do you actively think about how you portray yourself? Any advice about that topic?
I don't. It's oftentimes I'm the only woman in the room, right? So I sit on the boards of, I have sat on a board of a handful of different companies, and on all those I've always been the one woman in the room, right? I mean, much like when I was in the operating committee for Boston Scientific, it is pretty typical. So I like to think I really just try to.
Or you're an engineer.
Or I'm an engineer at Stanford, right? Same thing. A left-handed engineer, female, I was kind of in the rarity, right? And so it was, it's something that, I think it's just being true to myself, being authentic Lisa for good or for bad, right? I don't have the time or the energy to kind of have any sort of be pretentious or have a kind of an air or really kind of this is how I'm going to be. I just am. Right? And gosh, it's freeing to do that, right? If I had to think about, because I'm a woman, I need to act this way or this way, I try to do good work, I try to hire great people, I try to give them the resources they need to be successful, and I try to get the heck out of the way.
Absolutely. Maybe around that topic, how do you think as an industry, we increase the number of women and people of color in leadership positions in health tech? Do you think about that topic?
I think about it a lot. In fact, we're just starting an initiative at AdvaMed around this very topic. I was just emailing about today, and in fact, there's a group of folks who are actually looking at applying the Stanford biodesign process to this very question. Basically, we're in a world of hurt as an industry broadly. I think healthcare broadly, it's probably better on the provider and payer side than it is on the sort of product side. But it's really unfortunate. It's interesting because my company, half of my leaders are female, half of the company is female. Half of the country, by the way, is female too. If you didn't know. 3 of the 7
More of
members.
Congress is female.
Yeah, more of Congress, but still so much goes. So it's, like I think about like, oh, this is an issue we have as an industry. I'm like, no, it's an issue we have as a country, right? And so I think what I try to do, my small part of like being a role model, right, serving as a mentor, trying to hire the best person for the job, and lo and behold, sometimes they're women. Oftentimes they're women, funny enough. If you really kind of put aside or different colors or different, whatever kind of, however you think about diversity, right? And I think that's something I'm really proud of, and hopefully being an example, right? So that others say, like, it can be done. And gosh, by the way, I mean, one of the stats I love is like, for companies that have more women on the leadership team, they actually outperform their peers, right? So that's not such a bad thing either.
So I promise, Lisa, we promise.
Oh, the really
Lisa,
hard question?
Try, yeah, that,
Oh, I thought you meant the really hard question.
that we're going to do.
Porn. Okay.
That we're going to try to get her out here.
Yeah.
So we're going to move to our last question. Now, I've done this for years, and I've never seen a question get 41 votes in years. I don't know what's come over our audience, but they want to know, what did you do with the corn? I don't even know what that means. But
what do you do?
Can you maybe explain the corn job a little bit?
The corn job, well, you detassel it, so there's, and so it's basically like taking off the top of it, and what you're trying to do is you're creating a certain hybrid of corn, right? So you guys some of you are scientists, right? You're trying to create just the perfect blend of corn, whether it be seed corn. Most of the things we did were seed corn versus, quite honestly, like I still love corn despite having spent way too much time in cornfields. I still love ice cream despite the fact that I worked at Dairy Queen for 3 years. So sometimes you just can't get over yourself.
From seed investing to seed corn.
I know. There we go. We've come full
Thank you
circle. So,
very much.
all right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, that's so funny.